my name's Jade, and today we will be discussing Lore by Alexandra Bracken. Alexandra Bracken is also the author of the Passenger duology and the Darkest Minds trilogy, as well as the Prosper Redding duology. I love Passenger. It's one of my favorites. I love both the books so much, and I was obsessed with The Darkest Minds back in the day when I read it. The Darkest Minds itself, the first book, is probably one of my favorite books. I had so much fun with that one. So Alex is one of my favorite authors. I love her books, and I was so excited to get into a new one. I'm not sure how I would describe it. I'm gonna try, but I didn't really understand it until I read it. Lore is a Greek myth retelling type of book. Every 7 years there's something called the Agon, and in the Agon a bunch of the original gods are being punished by Zeus, and so they go into mortal bodies and they are hunted by the ancestors of ancient Greek heroes such as Heracles and Perseus and Odysseus, with the aim of trying to kill these original gods in these mortal bodies. Lore is our main character, and she doesn't really want to be a part of it, but she kind of finds herself being dragged into it in the very beginning of this novel. It's a standalone as well, I've not said yet, but Lore is a standalone, and I think it works really well as a standalone. It's a really strong standalone. You're really satisfied coming out of it, I think, because you have so many ups and downs, and there's like little breaks where you can kind of chill, because you slowly learn about the world as you go through. It feels more satisfying, at least to me. It felt almost like the depth and the kind of the intrigue that a series would have, where you keep on reading to find out what's happening, but within this limited amount of time. It felt like I was getting like my money's worth. Well, I wouldn't mind it being like a longer standalone, and I'm sure there were like restrictions and stuff. I really enjoyed Lore. I'm struggling on how I would rate it. I'm gonna kind of try and talk about my thoughts in a non-spoilery way. I'm not gonna spoil anything yet, but there might be some mild spoilers, so if you don't want to know anything before going into this, you might not want to listen to this. Can we talk about how pretty this cover is for a second? When I first saw it, I wasn't obsessed, but the more I look at it, the more I like it, the more I think it's clever. This gold writing is kind of tarnished looking. It's like marble throughout it. It's cool. A lot of my problems with this one are quite nitpicky small things, and I think that's why I'm struggling rating it, but then I also just didn't like fall head over heels in love with it. I do think it's really clever. I think the way the world building in this one's kind of unique. It's kind of different from the world building she's done before. I feel like you're kind of thrown into it, and the main character for the most part knows what's going on. Obviously she's a part of this world. You slowly learn through what's happening, what's going on, and the way there's like all these kind of mysteries throughout the book that are slowly revealed, and there's so many like symbols and metaphors and foreshadowings. You'll see it and you're like, oh, I bet this means something, and then it will, and it will come back around, and she'll reference it again and look at it from a different perspective. The way it was structured in that way was so clever. There's so many clever metaphors and symbols, so I have a lot of respect for it, no matter what I end up rating it. The writing was so beautiful. There were so many really beautiful lines. I think I could have personally done with it being in first person rather than third. We're pretty close to Lore's perspective anyway, so I think there was a little bit of stiffness that maybe third person would have taken away from me. I mean, if third's done right, I don't mind. I really liked it in the Passenger duology, for instance. There's something about it in this one that I think I might prefer it first person, but again, that's such a minor thing. And there was a few really kind of tiny fussy things with the writing, like there was a repetition of a particular line a lot, and then there were like little repetitions, and there were one or two moments where things didn't quite line up. Like on one page a character would be doing something, and then the next page like they were doing something else. Like I remember someone was kneeling down, and then on the next page they fell to their knees. I was like, wait, but you're already kneeling down, I thought. And it might just be me. There were some moments that I got confused, and for the most part when I reread them they made sense, but there were one or two times where I was like, hang on a minute, what? But again, there weren't a ton of them, and I'm a very critical reader. I notice these things. I also think they could have been aged up, but I don't know if this was a publishing thing. I don't know why they were the ages that they were. There were like flashbacks in this book. You get to see Lore at a younger age, and she was like, I thought she was 10, but to me she felt like 12, 13 maybe. Like it wasn't a huge difference, but just a couple of years I think would have made a really big difference. I thought she was supposed to be like 17 in this book. I thought she could have been like 19, 20. So again, not a huge age difference, but just the way they were acting and some of the things they were doing and how dark and gritty the story was. It was really dark and gritty. I think her age and description were quite murky around the beginning. It took a while for us to get a description of what Laura looks like, and that kind of annoyed me. But again, they're so far in the past now that it doesn't really matter. The only other like nitpicky thing I have is I really enjoyed the characters. I really loved Laura. She had a lot of depth to her. And Athena is in this novel, and she also was a really interesting character. The other characters I really enjoyed, and they had depth to them, but I felt like we could have gotten more. Some shone better than others, I think. Just characters and dialogue, so on. The dialogue in this was great. All of her characters have always been really great. A couple of them just felt a little flat to me in comparison, I think, to how amazing her other ones were, or maybe I just didn't connect with them. I felt like that whole time I was talking about these things I was frustrated with, and like I kept knocking them down saying, well, they're such little things, and they are little things, but they did add up. No, I think that might be one of the reasons why it didn't grab me. There was a spark that was missing at times, and there were times where I was like, this is amazing, I love this. But then there were a couple times where I got, I don't want to say bored, but it lacked something for me. It's such a unique, interesting take on the Greek mythology, and there's so many really interesting ideas that like make me stop and go, whoa. And it has this really hardcore feminist theme, and it's about grief, power, and what it does to people. I'd give it like I'm gonna just say an 8.5. Also, I was really nervous because I cried at the end of every single thing of Alex's I wrote. And so there was like this pressure to love this one. And I did. At the end of Lore, I teared up. There's something about the end of Alex's books that just get me. Every time I was like, oh, I'm not gonna tear up at the end of this one. Like, I don't have the love for it. But I did. Maybe it does deserve the 9 out of 10. Maybe I'm just being too picky. On my Alexandra Bracken scale, we have Wayfarer, The Darkest Minds, Passenger, Through the Dark, which is a collection of novellas, Lore, Never Fade, In the Afterlight. Okay, I'm going to get into some spoilery little details about this book that I really enjoyed, so if you've yet to read the book, I recommend you leave now. Athena was such an interesting character. I was suspicious of her for a long time, and then I stopped for a while. We were in the park and Artemis said, you betrayed me, and no one she picked up on it for a second, but then she forgot in all the chaos, and I was like, wait, do you not remember what she just said? And then she chooses Athena's side over Cassius. I was like, no, this is bad, this isn't gonna end well. And then there's the reference about a knife being passed between two people and how it means like you're gonna end up using the knife on each other. Crap, it's gonna go down now. She kind of redeemed herself in the end though, and like when she was saving the people in the city after the bomb, she was so interesting, and you can kind of see where she's coming from. She just wants her father's love, and like all the talk about Medusa and how she always helped the men and never the women. It's very interesting stuff. Talking about the end, for me, I wanted a little bit more from that big last fight scene. And when she's like pounding, trying to get the fire out, I wasn't 100% sure what was going on. I'm okay with it. I just wanted a little more. And I think from the very, very end as well, I just wanted a little more. I want it to be a little bit longer. When we wrapped up that the Agon is ended and that those two aren't gonna be gods anymore, that kind of happened very quickly for me, and it felt weird that she just prayed to Zeus and then he took it away, and how we figured out why Athena and Apollo ascended. I wanted more time for that to breathe in between the end of the Agon. From her becoming Athena to the end, I was like, is the Agon still going? Why is he, like, we've not answered any of these questions, and then we get it right before the end. I just wanted it to be a little more fleshed out, and I just wanted a little more from that big fight scene, because there are so many cool fight scenes. When she was chasing that kid, the son of Wrath, I was all hot and bothered. Let's talk about some of the beautiful lines. 7 years stretched between them like the wine dark sea. If you've read ancient Greek myth, you know like the thing about how they thought the sea was dark. Like there's this whole theory about how they couldn't see blue. I'll leave an article down below. It's really interesting if you didn't know about that. And there were loads of little like hints of other myths that just kind of grounded it in the world better. And I just loved how that kind of really saturated this world and made it feel really strong. In that moment, the past became the present and the present past. It was just the two of them in the shadows of their city, the way it had always been, the way it should have been forever. I love that New York City was kind of its own character. It had such a strong presence. I do feel like it was a little overdone at times. He met her gaze. He said nothing, but then he never needed to. His face was a book that had been written only for her. Its story unfolded while he watched her watch him. Azora's eyes adjusted to the low light. Van's look of longing developed like an old photograph. It was so stinking beautiful. There were so many lines that was just like, oh, that's beautiful. Oh, that hurts. There was one about trees. I can't remember exactly what it was. I didn't write it down, but it was beautiful. I loved Castor's cheesy jokes. When they're in the bathroom and she starts hyperventilating, I can't remember what it was. It was such a cheesy joke, and I loved it. I loved how cute he was. He was one of the people that I felt like I could have done with just a little bit more from him. I loved this weird fake temple when we're in the Achilles house. I didn't see it being Castor coming. I mean, the signs probably were there. The gasp that came out of my mouth, I was freaking out. There were so many like little cliffhangers throughout this, and it was so adrenaline pumping. I loved that about this. I loved the pacing. It felt so right. I loved the conversation between Laura and her dad about the Spartans and how the Spartans weren't really the Spartans because we've talked them up. They weren't as good as we've made them because we've turned them into legend, and how like you can think about history in that way. It made me stop and go, wow. And I loved as well when Athena talked about how there's many lands and they all have their different religions and they all have their different gods. It might not have necessarily been intended in this way, but to me I had this image of like all these different gods like living harmoniously and all these different religions living harmoniously, and they can all exist. And I mean, they can all exist because who's to say what's right and wrong? Everyone's entitled to their opinion, entitled to their beliefs. I feel like in history we always talked about how like religion is so often the cause of war and so often the cause of like such devastation, and it was really nice to hear it talked about in that way, like harmoniously all existing at once. Oh my god, the first reference to when she had the Aegis, I was like, what do you mean she has the Aegis? It didn't confirm that she had it, but like Wrath didn't have it, and it made it sound like she knew where it was. Like, what the hell is going on? And I'm theorizing like crazy. I can't remember any of my theories. I think a lot of them were wrong. I knew that Apollo had died willingly. I knew that he had let Castor kill him. Oh my goodness, when Laura's hiding in that room and that guy, that jerk, comes out, I wasn't expecting to be done with him so soon, but I was glad we were. And the dog, I was so worried about the dog. We never checked back in with the dog. Is the dog okay? Like I said, with the foreshadowings and things coming back around, there was one specifically with the fake temple, and I can't remember what it was, but it was brought up again in the end. When we were reading it, it's like, this is beautiful and it's like symbolic of so much, I'm sure. There were so many like symbols about power and history. It was so good, and I love the feminist thing going through it as well. I think sometimes when these things came back around, it was over-explained just a little bit, because there would be like an insert of like a line from an earlier part or a flashback or something, and then it would be explained, and I felt like it didn't always need to be explained as much as it was. Like I'm picking up what you're putting down, but again, maybe it's in the lower age demographic. It's okay. Just thought it would have been a little bit more sophisticated had she not done that. Her and Miles drinking wine on the roof was one of the things that was like, how are you 17? Oh, I love this section when Castor and Van came back to the brownstone with her, and Athena was throwing broom handle and like the curtain rail. Like Thor's just like, my broom. Oh, and her being 10 in the flashbacks, like 10-year-old Laura is just left alone to look after her baby sister and her younger sister like a baby. That didn't feel right to me. That felt like a 13-year-old. Like if she was 12, 13, that's one thing. And obviously I really love the end. It made me tear up. That is everything I have for this video. If you have read lore, I'm assuming you've read lore if you're here, please let me know what you feel about it down below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have an awesome morning, afternoon, evening / night. My name's Jade. I hope I see you again next time. Goodbye!